Welcome to our podcast, Evolving Educators. My name is Donda Sladen, and we are so excited to have you listeners here today. Chris, how's it going?
It's going great. I'm super excited for the episode today. Who's joining us?
So today we have Ruth Anderson. She is the principal at Benz Branch Elementary, and she's going to be talking to us about behavior as a form of communication. I'm very excited about this topic. This really is a thing that we're evolving around and changing our approach to the way students behave and react to things. And so I'm very excited. She's an expert in behavior. She was an assistant principal, and this is a topic that she is really skilled to discuss with us. So I'm very excited to have her, Chris.
I can't wait to learn more from her about this topic after the break.
Welcome back. So we are here with our guest, Ruth Anderson, principal at Benz Branch Elementary, and we are so excited to have you here, Ruth Ann. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And so today, Chris, we're going to talk about a very important topic, and I know school principals will love this topic because it is the topic of the hour, really, and that is behavior. And so our topic today is behavior, but as a form of communication. And so what does that really mean, Miss Anderson?
Well, everybody has their emotions, and they're trying to figure out how they need to regulate them. And so, and when they're little, they're having big emotions, and they don't know what those emotions mean. So a lot of times those come out as reactive, where then we might end up screaming out, or we might end up hitting or kicking, and it's not necessarily meant to target anyone. It's a matter of fact that they're trying to communicate something that is going on underneath. And so, behavior is a form of that communication, and we just have to get down to the function of the behavior.
So then really, those reactions are really lack of a vocabulary then, and lack of probably life experience. Wouldn't you think, Chris?
100% at that age.
Yes, especially. And I'll tell you, it's really not even that uncommon at older, upper elementary or middle school for sure. They become caught up in the moment. Mm-hmm. And they really don't have any skills to fall back on. Would you agree with that, Miss Anderson?
100%.
Yes.
And so it's our job to teach them. Just as we do with academics, you can't expect them to get from point A to point B if we don't have the skill set. It's the same thing for behavior. You can't expect them to get from point A to point B if we haven't taught that skill set, and they're not coming to us knowing those things like they did in the past. This is something that we're going to have to incorporate as part of our curriculum, really.
So what do you contribute that to? You know, it's not been that long ago, really, to where, students came to us and maybe they had some misbehaviors, but, pretty much they came, respecting adults, respecting the environment they're in. What do you think are some contributors to that?
Well, definitely one of the contributors is, and I know nobody likes to hear the C word, is COVID. There was definitely some research that supports that. In addition to technology, people aren't having conversations face to face anymore.
Sure.
They're having conversations via text, and so that is a lot of what we spend our time at the elementary level doing, is teaching how to have an actual conversation and teaching how to problem solve.
So how would you do that? Is that like a role play, or how do you teach those things?
Yes, ma'am. So a lot of times when they come to the office and we're actually this is something I encourage the teachers to do in the classrooms as well, is we sit and because they want to both talk over each other, and so I'll stand in the middle as a mediator, and we're going to kind of, okay, I'm going to let you talk first, and then you're going to get to talk, and then we're gonna talk through what all happened, so I can get everybody's perspective. Once we get to the perspective and we get to the bottom of it, then how are we going to solve that? What are we going to do next? Because they don't know what to do next. All they are doing again is just being reactive. And
what I hear you saying that I love is, really, it is about you being the mediator. Mm-hmm. You have two people, then you're teaching people how to listen, how to actively listen, right, Chris?
Absolutely.
So often we are listening to respond and not just actively listening. So I love that. Miss Anderson.
Yep. It is absolutely active listening, and also making sure that we're giving an opportunity for both parties to communicate, because there's a lot of times whenever we're having our little tiffs, and one will get to say their half, but the other one doesn't get to say their half, and so that's where some of the tiff ends up being coming from. And in saying that, with those, a lot of times I like to incorporate our counselor as part of that, just because I don't want them to think at that moment when we're role playing and we're going through what the expectation should be in a conversation, that they're in trouble. Because it's not a matter of the fact that they're in trouble. It's a matter of the fact that we've got a problem. We've got to work it out. Now, once I've given you my expectations and you know what I want, that's a different conversation. But I can't expect them to come in knowing what they don't know.
Sure. I love that, because what I hear you saying, really, I mean, we're not talking about skirting accountability or their responsibility. Right. So what's kind of the timeline? Let's just say on a third grader. Mm-hmm. So you bring them in and you practice one time, and then...
We practice a time. We give the parents a phone call. We talk the parents the language that we used. Oh,
I love that. So you're coaching the parents as well?
Absolutely, yes,
ma'am. I love that.
And that way, whenever they're going home and having these same things, the language is the same across settings, which is very important when you're teaching kids about behavior. And then also I take them back to the classroom and we do a restorative piece with the teacher, and we talk through, hey, this is what I did, this is what I should have done, and I want to apologize to you because I need to right my wrong. And so
I love that.
And then from there, I also put an accountability piece on the teacher too, to make sure that they're also using the same skill set that I just taught. But then I tell them too, and I tell the parents the same thing, that I don't expect them to know walking in, but now that I've taught them, now we've moved on from just teaching the expectations and procedures to now that you're going to be held accountable for that.
Sure. Oh, I love how you're involving the teacher, the parent, a counselor. I mean, that is a true teachable moment. Right. And so the students will understand the expectations. I love that. And so how does understanding the behavior as communication, how does that impact the learning of the whole school then?
I think once we all have a grip of understanding that behavior is communication and not just a result of something.
Do you find teachers take it personally?
Yes. And I know I answered that quickly, but yes, it's not meant for you to, but sometimes it's hard not to take it personal.
Sure.
Especially if you have a good relationship with the child, but you have to take yourself out of that equation, and you have to think that when they're at that level, it's a fight or flight mode, and so they're not going to be able to have a normal conversation with you, and they're going to lash out at the people they love the most. That's what happens especially with kids that don't have anybody to support them and love them like we do here at school.
So that reminds me of, talking about teachers, how important is it to model, those types of things? How important is that? Or should we just tell them, or what should we do day to day?
Well, I think of that just like you think of, again, with academics. Or is it, yes, you tell them, but how are they really going to learn practice? And so it's going to be making sure that you're putting forth those opportunities to teach the expectation, practice the expectation, and then and identify what the need is. Because ultimately, what it comes down to is there's a need that's missing, and we've got to figure out what that need is. And so it's a lot of it. I tell my teachers the first 2 weeks of school, and any time that you have a break, expect to be teaching behavior over and over again.
So this is an ongoing thing?
Yes, ma'am. It's not a one and done. It'll never be a one and done, because what worked yesterday is not necessarily going to work tomorrow. It may not work in 5 minutes.
Sure. So then how can a teacher, or how can we support, as a leader, how can we support our new leaders and even our teachers with growing that toolkit? What are some things we could do?
Some of the things that we do is again, on our end, it's modeling. With my new assistant principals this year, that's something that I would tell them, this is how I want you to work through this with a kiddo that's having a behavior, because I want it to be consistent all across the front office too. Oh, and sure. So that we would work through together. Then also my teachers have taken it upon themselves, which wasn't even a requirement, which I love, to utilize time that's the kids' time for example, recess time, to practice those expectations. So, and I'm not talking about punitive discipline where we're walking laps. They're not going to make they're not going to make a link to walking laps to something they did 3 hours ago. They're just not. And so at the end of the day, that's not going to change the behavior if you're trying to change the behavior. So if, for example, if you have a kid screaming out in class, let's practice what we should have done instead of screaming out in class. So I'm going to have to take some of that time during your recess time because you took some of my time. The time stealing. That is a big deal especially for the littles, just because they don't have a sense of time as much as the older ones do.
Sure.
But the older ones, it works just as well because they do have a sense of time, and they do know that if they have to stay after school to make up the time that they've taken from the teacher
or lunch when that's their social time.
Exactly. They're missing out on things that they want to be a part of.
Absolutely.
So I love that because it really is very connected. That's what I love what you said, how to make it connected. I mean, we could put them, in ISS or OSS. However, how does that bring it back to changing the behavior? Because ultimately, that's what we want. We're not here. 100%. We didn't sign on for, being disciplinarians and going after kids. I mean, we're here for the kids. And so we just it sounds like we really just need to take on a different mindset, would you think?
It is.
So what are some older ways of thinking, of ways that we should really flip that and going forward?
And so that was, and I'll always tell everyone this, whenever I first moved over to Ben's Branch and I introduced this type of thinking, they thought I was crazy. They would, some of my favorite teachers, well, they're all my favorites, but some of the ones that were tough to get to buy in now are the ones that are leading the pack. And so, but in saying that, it is just, you can't just say, just because they shout out in class that's an automatic conduct mark. I'm also not a big proponent of clip systems, because all that is, it looks like it, from a lack of better words, it's really pointing out the wrong behavior, and that ends up setting the students off instead of being able to shift it. Even if you do a system where they can move up and they can move down, it's that the visuals on that side for some kids, that ends up being more of a deterrent than anything else.
And sometimes when they get to that level, because of their age, even if they're in middle school or high school, they're still young, still developing, and when it gets to that level, it's hard to de-escalate them then, because then they've just they feel like there's no redemption after that. Would you agree?
I agree, and so a lot of times when we get students up to us, or if we get called down to check with one, before we do anything, is I give them time. I give them a timer. I'm giving you 2 minutes, because I can't talk to them in that moment when they're in fight or flight. And then the beautiful thing within that is that they can tell me, hey, I need 2 more minutes, or hey, I'm ready to talk. Now, there's going to be some that are going to want us, I need 10 minutes, but you just have to kind of shape that.
Actually, I've used that myself, Miss Anderson. I have had my phone and set a timer for 2 or 3 minutes, whatever the case, the situation leads to. And I've even held it up to the student, and I just said, here's our timer. And I stopped speaking.
So powerful. Yeah.
Yes.
I did it even in the classroom.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
And so it's just that visual you're talking about, Miss Anderson, of the student can watch the time. They can they know they need to regulate themselves,
right.
And so do you teach them any strategies for that?
A lot of times what we'll touch base through is that, is for one thing, besides just using the digital timer, we also use sand timers. Something about that's mesmerizing to them.
That's a great idea.
I also had one that we used for several years. It was a liquid timer, so it would just kind of is like goo, and it would just kind of go through and that for whatever reason was like calming to them, and they were able to come out of it sooner than I expected.
Well, so then I guess really, Chris, that's almost like you're giving them something to hyper focus on, right?
Yeah, it's almost meditative. It seems like.
I would agree. I love that.
So, on our campus, every classroom has calm down corner. So within that calm down corner, they have strategies that are on the walls for them that help with, for example, with breathing, with just taking a minute, just with different things they can do with their hands to kind of like you said, almost hyper-focus their thoughts onto something different, so that way they're not thinking about what they're so angry about.
So let me ask you this. So when you have this calm down corner, I'm just picturing that maybe that's like in a corner or away from, so that doesn't turn out to be distracting?
No.
Isn't that interesting?
No, because we have to teach it now. And in saying that, like I said, with anything with behavior, it's all about teaching. So you're going to have to, if they have fidgets and things in the calm down corner, you're going to have to let our littles experience those a little bit before and then we start teaching them. But eventually it just becomes part of the classroom and part of what you do every day. And the goal is that the students will just go to the calm down corner, and you're not having to say, hey, do you want to go
to draw attention to them, right?
Yeah. And so the goal is over time that they'll be able to that will help with the self-regulation piece and the self-monitoring.
Yeah, I love that. So how have you been able to get parents on your side with this kind of, I mean, some people, I find people really aren't familiar with this way of thinking. I mean, it's really just that all or nothing. And not that we are trying to get the kid or whatever, but I think it's a lack of training and a lack of information about how the brain works and how we regulate ourselves, those kinds of things. So how are you able to because this is picking up traction. We want the kids. We need the kids in the class. We don't need them out of the classroom. When they're in ISS, OSS, or even in an alternative center, they're not with that great, teacher getting that focused instruction.
100%.
And so it's a teaching piece for them too. And this is what we've done today. This is why we've done it. This is what I need your support on at home. Just because we have tried, and we can use it. We've tried certain disciplines, because a lot of times, well, have you tried such and such and such and such? We've tried that and it wasn't successful. So let's try something different. Let's think outside of the box, because if what we're doing the same thing over and over again, that's insanity. And so at some point we have to stop and we have to really look and see what practices are being effective.
Sure. So how could we get teachers more on board with this? I know, at some campuses, there may be teachers that, are just more traditional and it's worked well for them. But, given what we know, what you said about COVID and just the changing of society, really. So how could we get teachers, as a new leader, what are some things we could say to a teacher to get them more on board with this type of thinking, with discipline?
It's definitely going to be the education piece. I know for my campus, what we've done, because I actually advocated, because I like the tough kids. I like the ones that challenge you, because the reason they're challenging you is because they need something. They need to be in most cases they need to be loved and appreciated. Yeah. And so how does that translate for them? It's going to translate into the unexpected behaviors, but we can change unexpected to expected behaviors. And so it's just, you have to think outside the box with that. And so we just take our time on trying to make sure that we're teaching those and we're modeling that. I also do a behavior tidbit of the week in my memo.
Oh, I love that.
Just so that way, just behavioral strategies that take you 5 minutes to watch, but it can be very quick to help you make a shift in the classroom. We spend a lot of time, and at least once a month, either in our faculty meetings or through professional developments, we also do additional training for that as well. They get a lot of behaviors, a form of communication, relationships.
Well, it sounds to me really like when we're talking about, behavior as a form of communication, it's the same thing, Ms. Anderson, as we are just as leaders trying to grow how to better communicate. Yes, that takes a little bit, a whole lot, right? Yes, so it's a little bit at a time, but it's just constant and ongoing.
Super consistent.
Yes, yes, I love that. And so, because some of the things like that I see at the middle school are, I may have a parent that I do have a good relationship with, but they'll say, I'm not really sure what to do with them, Dr. Sladen. I'm not sure. And so I love that you are incorporating the parent and giving them some tools to use, showing what you're doing at school and sharing that common language with them. I think that's really important, don't you, Chris? I mean, anytime we can have a common language, there's a situation and these are the things, and you're consistent with your message. So if I think, a leader is calling a parent or even speaking with a teacher, when you have that common language and they hear you saying the same thing over and over, that is is really what resonates with them and builds your credibility as the principal, Miss Anderson.
Well, it's been interesting that you say that, because one thing because you want to be able to define things. And so when I say expected behavior, this is what you should be doing. What does expected look like? This should be sitting in your seat. This should be paying attention. What does paying attention look like? You've got to define every little piece. And so unexpected is anything that is not that. And so you'll hear a lot of times at teachers, well, that's an unexpected behavior. And you'll hear the kindergartners, that's an unexpected behavior. And it's a big word, but they understand what it means, that we weren't following the guidelines required.
Well, that even reminds me of how important it is. So when we're trying to model what the expected behaviors that we want, then it seems to be extremely important that when you see someone exhibiting the expected behaviors, that you would point that out too.
Absolutely.
How important is that?
It's very, very important. And the more you want to, the shift on all of this is you want to move from the negative punitive view of discipline and consequence to trying to highlight the things that they do right.
So, Chris, it's like everything we try to do. What I hear you saying, Miss Anderson, is we need to move proactive instead of reactionary discipline. So proactive. So we're pointing out those things that they're doing well so that everyone sees it being modeled by the students, right? How powerful is that?
It is. And eventually that's the goal, is that they end up taking that piece over and they end up holding each other accountable. That's what you want.
Oh, that's amazing.
And so, and over time it does get easier. It's tricky initially and it takes a lot of time and effort. That's a complaint we often get from teachers, is that this just takes so long to get all this done. Yes, it takes a long time to get it done, but the time that you save on the tail end is so much bigger than all the time that you've spent having to recorrect things because you hadn't taught the expectations to begin with.
Well, and let's face it, Miss Anderson, we have to do that, because what kind of learning is going to take place without those expected behaviors, right? Yes, and so it really is one of those things that it's really non-negotiable without saying it's non-negotiable. Right. If you do not teach and model the behaviors, learning is not going to take place.
Well, and I also really want to bring up the point too of the relationship piece. I tell my teachers all the time, it is about relationships. Kids will do anything that you ask them to do if you have a relationship.
So what are some things that a new leader who is outside of the classroom, what are some things they can do to build relationships? Because I may have, if I'm in middle school, I have 150, but now as the principal, I have 1,300, and you have 1,000, closing in on 1,000. So how can a new leader make that a priority to have those relationships with the students?
Being visible. Making sure that in the mornings, whenever the kids come in, I'm out there grading them, saying hi, making sure that I try my best to memorize as many names as I can possibly memorize, because there's something to say about somebody knowing your name and knowing your face. Then in addition to that, it's what are their interests? When on a smaller scale, what are their interests? What do they like? Do they like baseball? Do they like football? How can I incorporate that? And so it's all those pieces that will really help build, because at the end of the day, they're not going to take any advice that you give them unless they trust you.
Absolutely.
And that seems, I'm so glad you said that, because that is one of those things that you would think would be common sense, but we don't think of that. Sometimes the most simplistic things need to be said, don't they, Chris? Because they often go overlooked. And so relationships is one of those. Yes, ma'am. Miss Anderson, you have given us some great information today. I'm so excited that you joined us.
Well,
thank you so much for coming.
This is my heart. I love it.
Good.
All right.
Chris, our favorite part of the show. We love a good quote. Miss Anderson, we just love to share with our viewers a great quote, something that would speak to you. We'd love for you to share. Do you have something?
I sure do. Here it is. So keep your thoughts positive, because your thoughts become your words. Keep your words positive, because your words become your behavior. Keep your behavior positive, because your behavior becomes your habits.
So
Super-
true.
super
That's
impactful.
amazing. Thank you so much for joining us, Miss Anderson. That was great. It's so good to have you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And before you leave, I'd really like it if you stuck around for our exit ticket segment. We love taking questions from our aspiring leaders in New Caney.
Yes.
And if you're interested, we'd love to have your thoughts on it.
I'd be happy to.
Okay, perfect. Well, our question today comes from Scott Groen, and he asks, what kind of measures, aside from the Panorama survey, are we using to evaluate school culture? Dr. Slayton, why don't you take this one first?
Okay, so that is a very good question because it is so important for us to keep the pulse of the campus. And so one of those things is simply walking around, being visible, asking. Having an
100%.
instructional team, asking them what their thoughts are. Also, what I really like to do is get my counselors involved and have them go talk to people and then report back to the ILT. So that sometimes, people don't really want to tell the principal all the things. However, they'll tell a peer, another leader, or a counselor. So there's lots of ways besides surveys. Although our district has a great survey that we send out every year, and we get the feedback from that, and those are always wonderful. A private survey that goes out, and those are good. But I always love to just get those little bites of information. Do you have something else, Miss Anderson?
Yes. So one thing that we do at my campus that I absolutely love is we do Jumpstart, and I always say this gives me the pulse of my entire campus for the whole day. And so everybody will come into the cafeteria and we'll do songs, dance, we'll do the pledge, we'll do our moment of silence, and just that short time, I'm able to really see what kind of a day is going to be for our kids, what kind of day it's going to be for the teachers. And so I really love, we do those once a week. I wish we could do them more because it's so powerful for
Yeah, it sets a
helping me.
tone.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
But on the days that we don't, it's just like you said, being visible, being available. I think that's a very important one too. There's rarely a time when my doors are shut into my office because I want people to feel like that you are welcome to come talk to me anytime.
Sure.
And so as much as I can keep those open, I do. There's very rarely that they're shut. And again, like you said, I think having the pulse check from your ILT, your counselors, they see a lot of things behind the scenes you can't see because you're trying to hold the fort together with all the moving parts.
Yes.
So, but having those conversations and having them come back. But I think, it's just checking in. One thing I like to do in the mornings is just go by and say hi to all the classrooms. I think that's so important, just so they see my face. I don't want to be remembered as a principal as like who was Miss Anderson. I want them to know. I want it to be a household name because I want them to feel comfortable.
I love that household name.
to come have those conversations if they need something, I want to get away from the office as being a scary place.
Sure, absolutely. I love also when you go around, have those conversations. Those are always so powerful. And one other way, the last way I would point out that's really good, Chris, that I found is when, we have a structured planning time once a week. And so I'm always, very rarely would I miss those. I'm in those most of the time.
Right.
And so we always leave, so it's for planning, right? However, we always leave 5 or 10 minutes at the end. And so when we wrap our planning up, and I'll say, okay, so our time together is coming to an end. Did y'all have anything that we need to discuss or talk about? And really what those have been great for are just those real quick things. Like even, do you have the schedule out for the PD day? It might be something simple. But that gives them access to an admin.
Yeah.
And also one thing that this is actually a recommendation from Ms. Davis at Brookwood Forest, and I love it, is in our weekly memo we put in, how are you doing? And so there's a little, they don't have
I've seen
to
that
fill
from
it.
her. I love that.
They don't have to fill it out if they don't want to, but it always gives them the option, and it gives me an option to respond to them and to kind of check back in.
And she even just has little emojis on there, isn't it?
They can.
It's not
very
anything
simple.
advanced. It's on her Monday memo. How are you doing?
Sure.
And she, they just respond, and it might even just be a check-in for her. But it's something to just kind of let the teachers know you're thinking about them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if
Love
you get
that.
13 smiley faces from the teacher and then you get a frowny face,
That's
you know
ex-
something's up. You
that's
got to go
ex-
check on that teacher.
That's exactly right. I love that.
And it's very quick and very easy to
Right.
do. Yeah.
Right. All right. Well,
That was great input, Miss Anderson. Thank
thank
you.
you so much for coming on our show and sticking around for the exit ticket section.
My
It was a
pleasure.
pleasure having you.
All right.
And we're so glad to have you in New Caney ISD.
Thank
Yes,
you.
absolutely.
Very happy to be here. Thank you.